All right, let's jump into this deep dive on Red Dawn, this 1984 film. We've heard you want to know more about it, about its impact, so here we go. We're going to be looking at a movie about American high schoolers calling themselves, like this, the Wolverines, and they're defending their town from, well, a Soviet and Cuban invasion.
A pretty wild premise, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And, it really came out of that whole Cold War anxiety thing, fears of a real-life invasion and all the tension around, what was it called? Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, Red Dawn wasn't just some action flick. It really captured that specific moment in history, those deep anxieties of the Cold War.
To understand just how big of a deal Red Dawn was, we got to talk about mutually assured destruction, or MA, as they called it. It was this idea, this terrifying idea that if the U.S. and the Soviet Union ever went to war with nukes, well, both sides would be totally wiped out. I think that's why Red Dawn, with its, conventional invasion, really hit home with people back then.
Definitely played into those fears. I mean, MD was a nuclear threat, sure, but nobody was ruling out a conventional conflict like what you see in the film. Red Dawn made that fear, real, showed what could happen if the unthinkable actually went down.
And then you've got these teenagers, these high schoolers, who become like freedom fighters. Patrick Swayze, Charlie Sheen, they're the Eckert brothers, leading this group, and they're suddenly fighting for their lives, for their country.
Yeah.
They even went through a real boot camp, can you believe that, to prep for their roles. What do you think director John Milius, what was he going for, putting them through that?
Well, Milius was known for this rugged, intense way of telling stories. Like you see it in his other films, Conan the Barbarian, stuff like that. That boot camp, probably his way of making the film feel, real gritty. Wanted those actors to really understand what war demands, physically and mentally, and it shows in their performances.
Makes you wonder, though, right? What impact did that whole experience have on them, these young actors, especially since the film, it doesn't hold back on the brutality of war. It's not some, sanitized Hollywood version, The Wolverines, they go through some truly awful stuff.
Yeah, and that's what makes the coming of age part of the story so powerful, I think. You see these teenagers having to grow up way too fast, dealing with the horrors of war, having to make, life or death decisions, talk about a contrast to their high school lives. It really hits home how much war, any conflict, takes a toll emotionally, psychologically.
One character who really stands out in that way is Robert. He's played by C. Thomas Howell. At first, he's this, kind of goofy, awkward kid. But war, it changes him completely. What are your thoughts on his character arc?
Robert. Oh, he's one of the most interesting parts of the film. I mean, he really shows how war can change people
Yeah.
in ways that are, profound, irreversible even. You see him go from this innocent kid to, well, a hardened fighter. It's tragic and, in a way, heroic, shows how resilient people can be, but also the terrible price of conflict.
And the film, it doesn't give you easy answers, does it?
Right.
No classic Hollywood ending. You're left with this feeling of, ambiguity. And I think that adds to how real it feels.
Yeah, that's Milius for you. No easy outs, no clear ending. Just shows how messy war is, No real winners, just survival and scars.
Makes you wonder how people reacted back then.
Yeah.
Intense patriotism, graphic violence.
Yeah.
Had to be controversial.
Oh, it was a lightning rod for sure. Some people, they saw it as this powerful statement about America, strength, resilience, a pushback against communism. Others, they thought it was jingoistic, too simplistic about the enemy. But hey, sparked a lot of debate, right? And that kind of shows it was effective, as a film.
It is interesting, isn't it, how a film can, get such strong reactions, especially given the whole, historical context. The whole war was such a huge thing. And Red Dawn, it really tapped into those anxieties.
Yeah, got to see the film through the lens of its time, the fear of communist invasion, nukes, the whole, East versus West thing. It all played into how people saw Red Dawn. It became like a cultural touchstone, reflecting those fears, anxieties of a whole generation.
And it's kind of wild how some parts of the film, they keep popping up
Yeah.
in pop culture. The Wolverines, they've become a symbol of, resistance. You see them in shows like South Park, even Family Guy. I think there's something about regular people fighting back against impossible odds that still grabs people.
Absolutely. That David versus Goliath story, it's powerful stuff. And the Wolverines, they're it, not soldiers, just kids defending their homes, their way of life. You root for them no matter what. That underdog story, it goes beyond history, I think.
Which reminds me, there was a remake, right, back in 2012, but this time it was North Korea, not the Soviets. The anxiety shifted. What do you think of the remake compared to the original?
Tough act to follow, The Cold War, It was over. No more fear of that big invasion. And North Korea, yeah, it was a worry, but not the same as the Soviet Union, the remake. It felt like any action movie. Missing that depth, the cultural impact of the original.
It's like the original was so tied to its time it couldn't be copied.
Hmm.
But there were other things that made it work, right? Like they filmed in New Mexico, made it feel real, authentic.
Yeah.
They even used locals as extras, right?
Yeah, they went all out to make that setting believable, and it worked. You really feel like you're right there with the Wolverines,
Hmm.
experiencing the invasion, the fight for survival. It's gritty. And those choices add to that.
And it's those little details, like Patrick Swayze, apparently he was really protective of the younger actors on set, just adds to the whole feel of the film.
Like he was on screen, right?
Well,
Leading the Wolverines. A mentor figure. In the film and on set. Makes it even more interesting to watch. Little things like that, they really make a difference. Like, did you know C. Thomas Howell and Leah Thompson, they were friends even before the film?
no way. Well, that explains their chemistry. It's so natural, especially in those dangerous scenes.
Really shows the good casting, And
Yeah.
the attention to detail they had in making Red Dawn.
Well, we've covered a lot, haven't we? Cold War, growing up during war, John Milius's style, even pop culture. What stands out to you the most about Red Dawn?
It's how Red Dawn really captures, like a snapshot, those Cold War anxieties, all the fears, the uncertainty. It makes them like a visceral experience. And it shows how uh, even something outlandish can still hit home if it taps into those anxieties.
It really makes you think. How would people react to this film today? The world's changed so much since '84. The things we worry about, how we watch stuff, even how we understand war, it's all different. You think a movie about teenagers fighting back, would it still have the same impact?
Interesting question. Okay, the Cold War's over, but invasion, fighting for freedom, those are still relevant. Big difference. It's the enemy. The Soviets, back then, they were a real threat. Their ideology, it was the opposite of America's today. The threats are more complex, harder to pin down.
So a new Red Dawn couldn't just be the same movie, different bad guys. It'd have to explore how war works now, the role of technology, the whole good versus evil thing being blurry.
Exactly. And it would have to, do all that without losing the audience or being too simplistic. Tough, but a good filmmaker could pull it off.
Would be interesting to see how they'd handle the patriotic stuff. That was a big part of the original, right? Would those messages still work today?
Hard to say. Patriotism, it's not so straightforward anymore. It used to be a rallying cry. Now it's more debated. Modern Red Dawn would have to be careful with that.
Maybe that's why we're still talking about Red Dawn. It
Right.
makes us think about patriotism, war, what we do to defend what we believe in, how our own fears shape the stories we tell, the stories we watch.
Yeah. Red Dawn, it reminds us that even the craziest stories, they come from real concerns. And by exploring those concerns, even through fiction, we learn about ourselves, about the world.
This has been a really great deep dive into Red Dawn. We've covered a lot, from the Cold War to its lasting impact. Hopefully you've got a new perspective on this film.
And maybe it's made you think about how those themes would play out now in our world. Would a new Red Dawn be about our anxieties, or would it be something completely different?
Something to think about, right? As we, well, keep exploring how stories are told. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.